Welcome to MM212 Consumer Behavior. In this lesson, you are expected to understand and apply the nature and basic concepts of consumer behavior and its importance in conceptualizing different marketing activities using different research approaches, consumer information processing and involvement, as well as consumer memory and product knowledge. This topic will cover three sections. First is Introduction to Consumer Behavior. Next is Consumer Information Processing and Involvement. And last section will be the Consumer Memory and Product Knowledge. We will always encounter the word market all throughout the subject. So, let us define first what is market. It means as an individual or organization with needs to satisfy, money to spend, and the willingness to spend it. There are different kinds of market in the world of business. Consumer market. These are markets whose sole reason is to purchase goods or services for personal consumption. Another type of market is business market, wherein they buy goods and services for their business operation. Like manufacturing company, they buy raw materials to create goods, or they buy tons of kerosene to be used in their machineries. Another market is the government market. This market buys goods and services to produce public services. For example, construction of roads and highways, new public school building, and many more. We also have a type of market which is known as the international market. They are people or organization from another country that buys goods and services in our country. And those market that buys product with the purpose of reselling it, it is what we call reseller market. With all these types of market, in this subject, we will be focusing in one type of market only. It is the consumer market. According to Hoyer and McEnnis, consumer behavior is the totality of consumers' decision with respect to the acquisition, consumption, and disposition of goods and services, time, and ideas by human decision-making units over time. Professor Philip Kotler also defines consumer behavior as the study of how individual, groups, and organizations select, buy, use, and dispose of goods and services, ideas, or experience to satisfy their needs and wants. Also, American Marketing Association defines consumer behavior as the dynamic interaction of affect and cognition, behavior and environmental events by which humans conduct the exchange aspect of their lives. Consumer behavior thus relates to all social, psychological, and physical behavior of potential customers as they become aware of the product, evaluate its features, purchase the goods, consume it, and tell others about the goods or services. Consumer behavior involves more than buying. It involves acquisition. It is the process by which consumer comes to own an offering. There are different ways to obtain goods and services, such as buying, trading, renting or leasing, bartering, gifting, finding, sharing, or even stealing. When we say usage or consumption, it shows the very core of consumer behavior, which is to consume. And by this position, it is the process by which consumer discards offering. The nature of consumer behavior involves the process of thinking, feeling, and actions. The dynamic nature of consumer behavior makes the development of marketing strategy an exciting yet difficult task. The present product life cycle becomes shorter and consumers are looking for better and new products. These are the reasons why company must constantly innovate to create superior value for satisfaction. People also constantly keep in touch with new information with the use of the internet. This involves interactive processes as environment plays a vital role on how people think, feel, and act towards new and innovative products. Marketers in the environment need to understand what products appeal to set of consumers. They must understand the new shopping strategies of the consuming public. The introduction of new electronic gadgets in the market is a new need of middle income groups. They would like to be in the circle of the new generation environment in touch with the global community. The prerequisites of consumer exchange process is that there should be two or more parties involved. Second, the parties must have something to offer that is of value. Third, they must be capable of communication and delivery. Fourth, they are free to accept or reject the offer. And lastly, the parties believe that the transaction is appropriate and desirable. There are different research approaches that is applicable in the field of consumer behavior, namely the interpretative and the traditional approach. Interpretative approach it is new in the field of marketing and was quite influential in shaping the attitude consumers. It is based on theories and methods and from culture and anthropology. It seeks to develop a deep understanding of consumption and its relation to consumer behavior. This research used interview and focus groups to understand the consumer choice on the products. It is a vital component in the development of new marketing strategy that will influence consumer buying behavior. The traditional approach this is based on theories and methods from cognitive, social, and behavioral psychology and sociology. This approach seeks to develop theories and develop to explain how consumers make behavioral decisions about the product or services offered by a marketing organization. This study involves experiments and surveys to uncover the buyer's decision making process involving consumer information and how the social peer group influence on consumer buying behavior. The survey findings have profound impact on marketing thoughts and strategy in the development of theories on consumer behavior. There are two areas of consumer behavioral concept. One area is the marketing research. By definition, it is the process and methods used to gather information, analyze it, and report findings related to marketing goods and services. Marketing research can be used to obtain information about the preferences, opinions, habits, trends, and plans of current and potential customers. Marketers also use those information to plan marketing strategies. Several marketing research were conducted to test different behavior of consumers in terms of buying products. Some of the areas are personality, motivation, decision making and influence of groups, and level of customer satisfaction. First area of consideration is personality. This refers to the development of the measures of personal characteristics for product segmentation, and the message design will appeal to the particular type of consumer. Another area is motivation. It shall be measured in terms of reactions to advertisement and promotions, and its appeal to the human needs and wants. We also had this other area of consideration where we look into the decision making and influence of groups. This refers to the consumer's decision making process that will develop the total marketing strategy to meet customer demand. It shall focus on the attitudes and behaviors of individuals and groups. And lastly, is the area of consideration with regards to the level of customer satisfaction. This refers to the level of satisfaction in the use of product or services and its attendant perceived value. It shall measure the behavioral response and the tendencies to engage compulsive consumptions of the product. It must focus on the physical distribution and other factors that develop the emotional and behavioral responses. It shall focus on the attitudes and behavior of individuals and groups. The other area of consumer behavioral concept is the environmental scanning and analysis. It consists the assessment of the external forces that act upon the marketing organization and its target consumers. This also refers to the threats and the opportunities in the marketing of the product or services. Environmental scanning can be further assisted by studying the external forces of the environment, the behavioral economics, and the natural and the technological environment. First area of consideration in environmental scanning and analysis is the external forces of the environment. The research goal should be able to predict the changes in these environments and how it influences the consumer buying behavior. Part of the external environment of the firm that we are pointing out is the competitive forces and the regulatory forces. Another area to consider is the behavioral economics. This is known as the study that shows how market decisions are made and the mechanisms that drive public choice. The three prevalent themes in behavioral economics are heuristics, framing, and market inefficiency. Heuristics means enabling a person to discover or learn something for themselves. Humans make 95% of their decisions using mental shortcuts or rules of thumb. Another is framing. It is the collection of anecdotes and stereotypes. And lastly, market inefficiencies. This includes mispricing and non rational decision making. The third area to consider in environmental scanning and analysis is the natural environment. Weather conditions such as typhoon and drought. This refers to the destruction of crops caused by typhoons and tree planting season during the time of long summer season. Health and social conditions. This refers to the various disease and the social economic conditions both in rural and urban areas. And the last area to consider is technological environment. It is the most important factor in the analysis of consumer behavior as it is the contributory component in the introduction of new and innovative products in the market. Let us now proceed to section 2. Information in marketing is defined as the content of what consumers receive from the outside world and the reactions that are generated. Consumer information is obtained through the different senses of vision, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. It can be further validated by understanding raw stimuli, composed of sound waves, light waves, and levels of temperature and perception. When we say consumer information processing, it is the process through which consumers are exposed to information, become involved with it, attend to it, comprehend it, place it into memory, and retrieve it for later use. Three factors that influence information processing. First, perception. The process through which consumers are exposed and receive information through senses. Then goes through the process of attention, where they allocate certain amount of processing capacity to the perceived stimuli, and consumer organize and interpret the information in order to obtain meaning from it. Second is influence. It is the degree of involvement of the consumer to the task. It is the process where the consumer will move from the exposure stage to the attention stage and finally to the comprehension stage. Third is the memory, the process where the consumers use the mental information processing of assimilating into active stimulus response as guide in decision making towards a particular product. Information exposure activates the consumer's sensory organ that the entire mechanism of information processing can begin. Selective exposure means that a person will avoid information inconsistent with one's belief and attitudes. For marketers, it is important to understand selective exposure, as it is useless to spend money for advertising when the consumer does not respond favorably to the product being advertised. Thus, marketing communication through advertisements and other medium must be used by marketers to activate the sensory organ of the consumers to develop favorable response to the product. Consumers are the ones who control their exposure to marketing stimuli. They avoid ads for product categories they do not use, indicating that ads are irrelevant to them. Survey revealed that 54% of US consumers and 68% of German consumers avoid ads. Because of selective exposure, consumers are zipping or zapping marketing information. Zipping is fast forwarding through commercials on a program aired earlier. Zapping is the use of remote control, switching channels during commercial breaks. Factors influencing exposure. Position of an ad within a medium. The advertisement is placed beside a magazine article. Another factor is product distribution. How often can we see a product in a store? Another factor influencing exposure is the product's location or the amount of shelf space allocated to it can increase exposure of a product. Attention is the allocation of cognitive capacity to an object or task so that information is commonly processed. Selective attention, consumers select which promotional messages they will pay attention to. Types of attention. First, the pre-attention stage. It is an unconscious process in which consumer automatically scan the features of the product or brand. The other type is the attention stage. It is the process where the consumer actively search for information of the product or brand that has personal relevance to them. Consumers may miss some stimuli, especially when in an unfamiliar surrounding. That's when we say attention is limited. Example: while watching TV with friends, A consumer may reduce the volume to pay more attention to what friends are saying. Another situation is that when consumers decide what to focus on at any one time or choosing not to focus on or mentally process other stimuli, then it is selective attention. Example: shoppers cannot focus on every display or product in a store, so they must decide which they will pay attention to. And when we say it is a divided attention, when consumers can allocate some attention to one task and some to a different task, like a person who is driving on the road and can also notice ads posted on billboards. The third stage in information processing is comprehension. It is the process of extracting higher order meaning from what we have perceived in the context of what we already know. It is the stage of information processing when the consumer begins to perceptually organize and interpret the information in order to derive the meaning about the product. Selective comprehension is when consumers interpret messages in line with their beliefs, attitudes, motives, and experiences. Marketers are concerned with message comprehension. Objective comprehension is the extent to which consumers accurately understand the message a sender intended to communicate, while subjective comprehension is that what the consumer understands from the message regardless of whether this understanding is accurate. Miscomprehension occurs when consumers inaccurately construe the meaning contained in a message. That is, when their subjective comprehension is incorrect. When customers may not comprehend a marketing message, when they have low motivation and limited opportunity to process it, when the message is complex or shown for only a few seconds, or when the message is viewed only once or twice, this shows the effect of motivation, ability, and opportunity. Also, there is an effect of culture, since comprehension may differ in different cultures. Consumer involvement is defined as a state of mind that motivates consumers to identify with product or service offerings, their consumption patterns, and consumption behavior. It is the perceived personal importance and the interest that consumers attach to the acquisition, consumption, and the disposition of goods or service. Involvement creates, within consumers, an urge to look for and think about the product or service category and the varying option before making decisions on brand preferences and the final act of purchase. It is the amount of physical and mental effort that a consumer puts into a purchase decision. Involvement affects the consumer decision process and the sub processes of information search, information processing, and information transmission. As what Leon Schiffman said, involvement is a heightened state of awareness that motivates consumers to seek out, attend to, and think about product information prior to purchase. It is the perceived interest and importance that a consumer attaches to the acquisition and consumption of a product service offering. Consumer involvement responses. First, situational involvement occurs over a short period and commonly associated with specific situation. Second, enduring involvement. when the consumers show a consistent high level of interest about the product. Third, self expressive important involvement, when the consumers felt that owning a new product will express their self concept. Fourth, hedonic importance involvement, when the product appears pleasurable and interesting. And the last kind of response is the practical relevance involvement, when the consumer sees products that have utilitarian value and beneficial for their daily use. Section 3 is about consumer memory and product knowledge. The most exciting advertisement is worthless if it doesn't make a reasonable lasting impact on the receiver. So, advertisers need to understand how our brains encode or mentally program the information we encounter that helps to determine how we will remember it, if we do at all. In general, we have a better chance of retaining incoming data we associate with other information already in our memory. There are three types of memory: sensory memory, short term memory, and long term memory. Sensory memory is the process when the consumer pre attention stage occurs. It permits storage of the information we receive from our senses. This storage is very temporary. It lasts a couple of seconds at most. For example, when walking to school, you pass by a cafe and you get a quick aromatic whiff of coffee and freshly baked bread. Although this sensation lasts only a few seconds, it is sufficient to allow you to consider whether you should investigate further. If you retain this information for further processing, it passes into short term memory. The type of sensory memory that briefly stores sounds, auditory information, which has been perceived for a small duration, is called echoic memory. Iconic memory is the type of memory that stores images and visual information. And the type of sensory memory that briefly stores tactile sense of touch is called haptic memory. Experiencing pressure, itching, and pain throughout the body follows various pathways, which comprises the somatosensory system and is stored in haptic memory. Short-term memory is a temporary storage of the information while being processed in the consumer's mental stage, where most of our conscious information processing takes place. It also stores information for a limited period of time, and it has limited capacity. This is similar to working memory in a computer. It holds the information we are currently processing. Our memories can store verbal input acoustically, in terms of how it sounds, or semantically, in terms of what it means. We store it when we combine small pieces of data into larger chunks. A chunk is a configuration that is familiar to the person and that they can think about as a unit. For example, a brand name like iPhone by Apple Incorporated can be a chunk that summarizes a great deal of detailed information about the product. And as for long term memory, it is the part of the memory where information is permanently stored for later use. It is the system that allows us to retain information for a long period of time. Information passes from STM to LTM via the process of elaborative rehearsal. This means we actively think about the chunk's meaning and relate it to the other information already in memory. Advertisers sometimes assist in the process when they devise catchy slogans or jingles that consumers repeat on their own, such as Bida ang saya, Just Do It, or Abot mo ang mundo. Encoding is the process by which we place the things that we experience into memory. The level of consumer expertise in determining product information is dependent on the level of exposure to the product. Unless information is encoded, it cannot be remembered. I'm sure you've been to a party where you've been introduced to someone and then, maybe only seconds later, you realize that you do not remember the person's name. Of course, it's not really surprising that you cannot remember the name because you probably were distracted and you never encoded the name to begin with. Even when information has been adequately encoded and stored, it does not do us any good if we cannot retrieve it. Retrieval refers to the process of reactivating information that has been stored in memory. We are more likely to be able to retrieve items from memory when conditions at retrieval are similar to the conditions under which we encoded them. Context dependent learning refers to an increase in retrieval when the external situation in which information is learned matches the situation in which it is remembered. Response is the process that the consumer develops the response by actively reconstructing the stimulus about a particular product. It's important to understand how we store all of the massive amounts of information we retain in our minds. Advertisers can structure their communication to make it more likely that subsequent messages will call up the knowledge of a brand we've already retained. Consumer knowledge is the amount of experience about the product information stored in the long term memory of the person. There are three dimensions of consumer knowledge. First is the objective knowledge, when the consumer has the correct information about the product. And when we say subjective knowledge, the consumer's perception of a product is based on reading the information without further experience about its use. And the selective knowledge is the knowledge learned from other consumers without further verification. Cognitive learning process is the learning process that involves associations with concepts and learning sequence of problem solving and gaining insights about a particular product. It is the active mental state in which people seek to control the information obtained through the various interventions in the consumer's environment. The study of a serial learning is concerned with how people place into memory and recall the information received in a sequential order. The association model of cognitive learning further applies to the product pioneering advantage. It is the process where the first product that comes first in the market tends to be recalled better by the consumer. It is effective under the following conditions. First, the stimulus and response words could easily be pronounced. Second, the consumer is familiar with both stimulus and the response words. Third, the words of the stimulus and the response are meaningful to the consumer. Fourth, the words are associated and correlated in the stimulus and response. And lastly, visual images are created to link the stimulus and response word together. The consumer memory network. Semantic memory network refers to how people store the verbal material in the long-term memory. SMN can store the following: the product brand name, advertisement characteristics, other advertisement used to promote the brand, category of the product, and the evaluation reaction to the brand. The consumer has extreme difficulty retrieving the information placed in long-term memory. This is caused by the proactive interference and the retroactive interference. What is the proactive interference? This is the information learned interferes with the new information. And the retroactive interference, this is the new advertising material presented after the old advertising blocks the retrieval response. Thank you for listening. Hope you have understand and applied the nature and basic concepts of consumer behavior and its importance in conceptualizing different marketing activities using different research approaches, consumer information processing and involvement, and as well as consumer memory and product knowledge. For more information, or if you have any question, just visit our Schoology class and leave a message. Have a good day!